solution. C'est quoi?
I think I'm not going to say it. Yes, if the morning shara you want to do this, whatever would be good for you.
Oh, yeah, of course. Pursuit and enlightenment of Buddha, Dharma, and by the merit of relation to the Dharma, may I achieve Buddha for the sake of all being. Sanje Chedan Zoji Zonaman La Changju Parado Dani Jasumon Da ji ju jin ji bi zo na man ji ro la bin ji san zhu ba shu san ji ji dang zo ji zo na man la zhang ju ban duo na ni jiao sun ji da ji ju jin ji bi zo na man ro la bin ji san ji zhu ba shu oh yeah. 마주 남지 다다니 비심제 탐지게 된도 dob자라나메 바양다바 조베 산지기 고마름 부지 진내자 토바차 디제도 탐비취에서 무슨 녀비 군군주기 리만을 봤세다 데셈바슈 다강 셈바제베 탐비취에게 참디 아니 가진 된다디 된다디 창주 람비 침묘기 되니 된다 막게 아니 이제 하동을 럽주가 들어다지 subject di nangla da tega subject changduen da ngeduen gi chebara sheba asinta diring da di changduen da ngeduen gi chebara di nangse gi da ma jushil ha de jode mutuni ma dus shugins.
Please begin by generating the motivation, thinking that I will do whatever it takes to achieve the supreme and highest state of perfect and complete awakening for the sake of all mother sentient beings who are infinite and vast as space. And for that purpose, I will listen to this Dharma teaching today. And the teaching where we are studying today is again in the great treatise on the stages of the path to awakening, the Lamrim Chenmo. And the section where we left off was in the section on the great insight, the section on insight, and the particular heading which we are reading, learning about today is the difference between the definitive and provisional, the difference between the definitive and the provisional. So we'll continue there. That's all.
Oh, yeah, do it. Tadina di Katula, Dakazin Kajigi, and the Badima, the journey that Tigi Lendila Tatusima Loe. 제대로 숭바부 덤비 깨와서 고바나스 아니 가서는 되는데 개발 잡이 내든기스 아니 도대 두만낭라스 개발 잡아 직중나 마중의 값수양 투모위 최입이 잘고라스 다든다 디 가르숭어스나 다든다 장동기 수납다 내든기 수납 나라다 내든기 수납들 다 지신바 인고래 했습니다. 딜라와 다든 자치지바 인고를 왔다 인고야들아 가지기 쨘바 주니와 당연히 그 수랍라 자치지바 인고나 아니 도대로와 그 수랍배나 콜로 법이값수 아니 깨와메 바당 아니 근데 강사메 발라서바 송도와스 어디 송바도 저더니 자치지바 수나 다 강사다 깨와라 소바 때님에 바 켈랭고도 뒤지기 말아와스 인두산이 다지 얘도 계시 깨와메 바다 강사메 바디 시즌에서 케밀라느니 다치시마 많이 봐 유아인상 아니 직디 장동이 수업 태기도 무슨 가지고 쨘바들라와 아니 디니 다 딜렌들라 갈송을스나 디리 송아 디리 쨘바 지기 말에 생선은 숨바부 땜베 깨와서 고바나 다 깨와메바 가바메 봤습니다. 강사메 발라서바 송에디 그 갑두기 칙들 떼에 말에 고주인데 갑가실라디니 변담바 깨와메바 대원담배 강사메바 아스니 자료요레스 오다 디 고라 자윤데디니 호라얀디니 마자네 튕기디니 가스나 깨와메바세디 대원담바 깨와메바와 강사메바세디 대원담배 강사메바 아스니 튕졸라디니 아니 개발디 랑싱이 고거레스 가스나 고주 가нул라 자 고라 자윤데 아니 디 호라 마 뜸바줄라야 잘고디 아니 깨와메바 강사메바세디 대원담바 깨와메바 대원담바 강사메바 고고연상 아니 가르레 딘조조 아니 슝치그죠 와스 인두산에 슝치그 나라 아니 당보드니 퇴연담비 깨와메바 스니 마자 퇴연담바와 칙자니 송연데 아니 호와도줄라야 퇴연담바 스니 마자네 깨와메바 강사메바 스디 퇴연담비 깨와메바 퇴연담비 강사메바 스니 오트줄라 고거래 인두산이 딘조 자에디 군조 슝가지 강가 투무도 아니 고야치도 된남기 개발자요. 그래서 인두산이 아니 딘데베 숭랍디 아니 자치시 마이바 두 말에 예den기 숭랍 마이바 두 말에 어둑스니 랜디 자와레스
So we'll read this page 114, and we had the qualm. That was where we finished last week. So now in the reply, this does not seem tenable because there are many definitive sutras in which the Buddha, the teacher who makes these statements, adds the qualification ultimately when refuting production and so forth. If he adds such a qualification once, then we must add it even where it does not occur, because it is a common attribute of all such refutations. Since the absence of ultimate existence is the reality of phenomena, how could a sutra teaching this not be definitive? So what we had was the qualm from above was someone who's presenting this suggestion that all these sutras, like in the middle turning of the wheel of Dharma, for instance, where the Buddha talks about there's not being birth, arising, production, not being persons, and so forth. Production does not exist. Persons do not exist, as he quotes the person giving the qualm. Then, well, really, since the definitive sutras and scriptures must be something where the literal, so where the words are meant to be taken literally, then it would turn these middle teachings from the middle turning of the wheel of Dharma into provisional scriptures instead of definitive ones. So that's the qualm. But the answer here that Tsongkhapa is giving is that actually that isn't really what we don't have to take those literally, because there's areas of those same texts where the Buddha adds the qualification. He pairs these phrases, there is no production, or production does not exist, there is no person. He pairs that phrase with the qualification ultimately, this particular word ultimately. So since for instance, at the beginning of the sutra, the Buddha says that ultimately production does not exist, or production does not ultimately exist. I don't think in the English there should be a difference for that, where you place it, but either way, there's this word ultimately that is added. Then you naturally have that understanding that that's what's meant when later in the same text, he just says production does not exist, persons do not exist. So you have to add that word in, even though it's not there in the actual literal wording. And so that's why so this is the response to that qualm.
다 대한 최대 대권한 님의 대답된 바때 예배미 갈라져 소다 디가스나 인다 깨와매 봐 되는데 깨와매 봐다 되는데 강사매 봐 세디 아니 된도 흉디 마게 강사매 봐 깨와매 봐 손이 되는데 강사매 봐 되는데 깨와매 봐스니 고연도 다 되는데 강사매 봐다 되는데 깨와매 봐디 아니 계시 다가란 게 아니 니루인상 다 대통령이 송랍디 아니 녀도용이 송랍 자기래 녀도용 송랍 많이 봐도 말이었어. 그래서 깨와매 봤을 때 되는데 깨와매 봐. 강사매 봤을 때 되는데 강사매 봤어. tin대기 때문에 아니 뒤 동닝우든 든지 조신의 땜비 흉을 두고여서 녀도용이 송랍 많이 봐도 말이었어. 페나티 값을 빼지 자와이는 빼스나 페나 셔럽니 보여와 콜로 봐봐 셔럽니 보급수 고딜라 풍봉하고 대다장 랑신기 동반 넘바 양타바 지수 따우 스니 풍보 여기 고딜라 자요래 랑신기 동바세 따우 호디마 수메 다메 티메 로메스니 코랑 카두 자요디 식디나라 수메 다메 티메 요르데 된다 가서나 수 랑신기 두바메 아니 너와 다랑신기 두바메 스니 된조라 강가라 랑신기 두바메 메메 자고디 뒤조 강가 동니 차대와 인도전에 대 동니 뜸비 숭갑인상 니등이 숭가 많이 바꾸고 말해스 독신에다 간다는 시카두카둘라 레레라더니 메세드라 토연담바 메랑싱이 두바 메스니 맞잖아요. 흉고라 자연되는 호라연도 좀 고도래스. 인도전에 아니 호 아니 뒤조야 돈이 때문에 콩라 도거래. 가서는 시강아양 자고와디 아니 때저에 강라 시연도 아니 호라야 등이 고거래. 인도전에 다 돈이 때문에 숭랍 인상이 되는 숭랍 로와 많이 봐도 말이스. 가지기다 장동이 숭랍 차기도 가서는 시그널라더니 데시나시 자투금도 라드 다 장동 소라 두고 말인 게 되면 소라 두고 가서나 돈이 된바 돈이 어디든지 소신데 때문에 아니 소라 인상 돈이 게 되면 소라 브레스 임비 유제 가서나 랑신기 도연담바랑 신기 마주바 도연담바랑 신기 마주비더니 최준레레니 마랑 신기 고르고래서 인도자니 무슨 맞잖아요 되게 고도고에서 아니 딜라때네 아니 가스나 매스니 가주 연아요 도연담바랑 신기 두바매 도연담바랑 신기 두바매스니 고거래서 그거에서 동반이 된 비스를 두고에서 이들 소라 두고래서다 디송도
So just that last line that was reading it again, since the absence of ultimate existence is the reality of phenomena, how could a sutra teaching this not be definitive? So that's what Tsongkhapa is saying, that the meaning of the definitive treatises and scriptures is really about this main characteristic or quality, which is the abiding nature or the reality of phenomena. So sometimes this word that is here rendered as reality of phenomena can also be called the abiding nature. So the abiding nature of phenomena is what's being referred to, and since those are all sutras, for instance, the Heart Sutra is one of them, and the Heart Sutra, the primary subject matter that is the explicit thing being presented, being taught, is emptiness. So again, that was the definition, right, of those sutras that, or scriptures that are definitive that we talked about last week. So since this is the case, then these still count as definitive sutras. And so, for instance, what happens like in a sutra like the Heart Sutra? So in the Heart Sutra, the very beginning of the sutra, it says that the Bodhisattva, the great being Avalokiteshvara, was looking perfectly at the emptiness of inherent existence of the five aggregates also. So since it says at the beginning of the sutra, the emptiness of inherent existence of the five aggregates, then later on in the sutra, when Avalokiteshvara states, there is no form, there is no feeling, there is no perception, there is no associated compositional factors, there is no consciousness. You know to add in that phrase that, or that the meaning of those statements, that part of the sutra is really, there is no inherently existent form, there's no inherently existent feeling, there's no inherently existent sound, there's no inherently existent taste, touch, and so forth. So that's the way that this works, is that you have to use the statements that were made at one part in the sutra, and then you are able to understand the meaning of other parts, even though the word ultimately might not be explicitly used, or actually the word itself isn't directly put into the phrasing that the Buddha used in certain places. So that's why this other kind of opponent, or the person with a different view in the Quam, they're saying that really these sutras actually are going to have to be seen or understood as provisional, because they're not meant to be taken literal, or their meaning, the words aren't the literal truth. So what Tsongkhapa is responding is that doesn't matter. It's not, they don't necessarily need to have the literal wording exactly right, because what really defines a definitive text or scripture is that its meaning, it's a scripture whose primary subject matter is explicitly presents emptiness, right? So that's all true with all these sutras. So they still are established as being definitive scriptures. And so
다 대단 많이 개발 지케베스 개발 책장 개고베스 대달 뛰면 예든 돈이냐 너바샤바 미니비치로 어디 독신에 가서는 다든다 가지기 쭈쭈바쭈바들과 다 개와당 강살아서바 이메도 주구래 계시 마이나 아니 개와메 봐도 켈린 바이나 되니 다치니 대답메 봐 주기도 인산다 다치진바 마인상 장도에 스케지 시에들과 다 고란 책들라 된담기 개발 맞아와 지 돈이 시계나 아니 저랑 개와서 아니 개와 메시지 개와 지 개발이나 다 되게 제다 아니 책 드니 가리래 오다 뒷등행기 책 대한 드니 매발 두구레스 개와 메시지 개와 고란 공유전 매발 말에 된다 말은 개와 매발 고거로 왔어 저런 뒷 마치와 전에 아니 개와 랑전바 코랑 매바 라기나 아니 뒤뚱게 칙대야 매바 임베드니 니뚱게 숭랍냥드니 샤투고 말해 신두산에다 개와 매바 세데드니 코랑게 랑도기 차니 개와 매바 매바체 디 공도 강한 매스디 퇴연담바 개와 매스니 고고와디 퇴응구 주분 그래 신두산이 디 니뚱게 숭랍 임바 직투고 말해 소다 딜렌디 자기도스
And then the final part of this response is where Tsongkhapa now is saying, otherwise, if these sutras did refute production in a general sense, then as far as particulars, they would also refute words, and hence even the definitive sutras that teach this could not make their presentations. So what he's saying here is that if we were to say that these sutras were definitive, like the Heart Sutra, the middle length teaching, the sutras of the middle turning of the wheel of Dharma, then, and we were to say that they were literally true. So if they were, if they had to be literally true to be definitive, and these were definitive and they were literally true, that means that we would be saying that just production itself doesn't exist. Arising itself doesn't exist. So you would have to say that then the words actually of the scriptures themselves don't exist. And so they wouldn't be able to posit anything, right? You wouldn't be able to make a presentation of anything. So Tsongkhapa is saying that's clearly an absurd, without adding in the qualification of ultimately, it becomes quite an absurd position. And so there's, this isn't able to be, so it can't, kind of, it doesn't turn into that. Like it won't, just because we are able to understand that you add the word ultimately in there, then it doesn't do this kind of, it doesn't make the sutras meaningless. I guess that's sort of a way you could say it. It would, it would make the words of these sutras meaningless if they were literally true, but that is not how we don't have to understand it that way. That's all.
아니 다 도이나레 아니 텐주이나레 다르와스 좀 nen데기 숭 아니 이나레 다 디제나고 물루르라 소베드니 아 지가리 텐주 숭교기다 텐주기 숭이나레 간다르 고야 공어 야 강강 이나레 호라레 간다르 디 자르수디 아니 가스나 딜라 마자와체 시카두 카둘라디니 베나 수메 다메스디 식 카두라디니 딜라 다치시마리도 림도 따야 말이스 다치시마리스디 슝강가 야 공오 강가야 딩니 아니 디텐된디 아니 다치시마 두도 조금도 따오르모도 식레레야 두니 아니 다메스디 다메와 마라와 다요르와스 틴데기르와 수메와 마라와 수요르와스 틴데기 녜되고 소나스 따당 디마리스 슝 공오 강가 슝디기 슝 공오 강가 딩니 아니 메세데 가리 메시기도 와 뒷세네 되네 토연담바랑 신기 매바디라 고용디 아니 녜등 수럽 차루고레스 요 딘두자니 다 티기비나 셰와이나 되네 치카도고들 메세데 토연담바랑 신 매바 토연담바랑 신마두와 토연담마 마두와 데마 마두와 수구도와 스니 딜라 고용디 아니 치기 때 고랑게 땡된디 돈이 때마디 고두그래 인두자니 다 장동 수로이바 도마레스 녜등 수럽 오다 딘데 손상 다 둔다도도 디 낭되 갈송을스나 아니 녜등 수럽 간데지 이나양 서봐 아니 칙레레 카두니야 마데마치 슝공어야 딩니 낭되라 토연담바 마두와 데마 마두와 랑시 마두와 틴데기 되니 낭된 자주 요액이다 차와이나 아니 돈이 땜비 돈이 무딘 딘지 소신의 땜비 수럽 차도 그래 인도산이 녜등 수럽 샤고레스 다 슝야 공어 디니 다른 토연담바 마두비랑 신 틴데기다对那的차기 메와 다른 딜레 신다지 공바바 제고 있는데 장도연은 딜레지 내용을 쓰네 다 디인도 다 장도연다 녀도연 세디 시코랑 슝 공어 강아야 뒤인데 낭도연디 돈이 동반이라 잔이 조마 시행도 아니 녀등의 송라 다 동반이라 마자와체 되는다마 마두와데 되는데마 많이 받체 아니 군주비 최조를 잔이 마 송고에나 아니 장등의 송랍스니 다 딜라니 녀등의 송랍다 장등의 송랍 외진바 세다 당원한서 녀고에도 조다 딘대징 녀고도
So next we have this sentence. Therefore, you should understand that a sutra or a treatise may still be definitive, even if what it teaches in a few isolated phrases cannot be read literally, when stripped from the context of the general system surrounding it in that scripture. You also should understand that even when the teaching of the very words of a text can be taken literally, the text may still be provisional. So here it's summarizing this way of identifying the meaning of definitive and provisional. So whether you're looking at a sutra or a commentary teaching text from another author, whether it's the word of the conqueror, the Buddha himself, or the words of someone like Nagarjuna, all of them have the same basic way of understanding whether they're of dividing the provisional from the definitive. So again, that the way we have to do that is by not just taking a few isolated statements without looking at the wider context. So if you just take one sentence or one phrase here and there and say, well, that's not literally true, that's not meant to be taken literally, so it can't be definitive, that's not appropriate. So in one sentence it says there's no form, there's no sound, there's no objective taste and smell, and that's meant that you need to look at the entire context. So you need to go back to the front of the sutra, the beginning, look at the end of the sutra, and put it all together. Once you put the sutra together, then you're able to understand what is meant by those words, where those few words themselves might not be literal, but you're able to understand what is meant by them, that there's ultimately no form, ultimately no sound, ultimately no production, ultimately no person, and so forth. So you have to see, so then by doing that, you can see that the real way to determine the definitive sutras is not simply by the necessity that every single word is literally true, but that the meaning, the main content or the main meaning being taught is emptiness, is the lack of inherent existence or emptiness of inherent existence. It's the lack of things ultimately being established ultimately. So the lack of being established ultimately. And then you can see any sutra where that's the main topic that's explicitly taught, then that is the way to determine that it's a definitive sutra or scripture of a commentary. And so then then those ones where they have conventional truths as their main explicit content, and the subject matters they're discussing are things which are other than this lack of ultimate existence, other than the emptiness of inherent existence. So if it has to be interpreted to some other topic, or if it has, if the topic being presented, if you have to interpret it further to get to the ultimate nature, or if you have to again, this word interpret can also be rendered as lead or guided or something. So if you have to be led from the main contents being presented further to get to emptiness, to get to the emptiness of ultimate existence, then those all are what are the provisional sutras. So that's how we have this way of identifying the definitive scriptures and then the provisional scriptures.
가당 대시 초벌 세저와 티체 아니 콜로파바와 아니 지 юм진디도 좀 부문이지 지제 동바 시라니 몰라서 봐 콜로파바 아니 까 타마티니 레바 넘버 쳐 도도 공대했습니다. 숨랍니다. 숨내고 와와 티나나다 장도다 니든 샤윤도 다 셈자마다 우마바치 우마바 나라양 우마랑주바도 우마 탄주바습니다. 딘데 지심이다 미자 레용 딜레윤도 다 디롭지지 마슈나 제라양 빼제신다 따윤도 전화조양 셈도 도바신다든지 랩스기로 와인도 전 디제시지 도스니 슈나 섬기도 신장에 된다 디고드마 롭지마 제시 슈에인스.
And so from here, there is a little bit of a tangential topic that we should cover, which is when we're looking at all the different sutras themselves, the Buddhist sutras that he gave, then he gave them in these three different ways, or he gave, three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, as they're called. So there's the first turning is the turning of the wheel of Dharma of the Four Noble Truths, four truths. And then there's the middle turning of the wheel of Dharma, which is the turning of the wheel of Dharma of non-characteristics, which it includes the Great Mother, the Small Middling, and extensive Great Mother Sutra, as well as the Heart Sutra and so forth. And then there's the final one, which is the excellently distinguished turning of the wheel of Dharma. The final turning of the wheel of Dharma. And you have some of the different philosophical paradigms within the Buddhist tradition. For instance, there's the Chittamatra, the mind only, and then there's the Madhyamaka, which is the Middleway school. And these both have a different understanding of, within those three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, which ones are definitive, which ones are provisional, and how to understand, how to define the definitive and the provisional. So there's also within the Middleway or Madhyamaka school, there's the Swatantrika Madhyamaka, as well as the Prasangika Madhyamaka, or the Middleway Autonomy school, as well as the Middleway Consequence school. So they each have a different way of explaining this topic of the provisional and definitive.
콜로 당보당 콜로 파바디 장동기 숭라브레스 콜로 타마도데 공제디 니동기 숭라브레스라고 다 뒤 장동당 니동디 아니 가리찬이 숭거스나 다 지신도로와 콜로 당보당 콜로 파바니 다 지신도 켈린도 미롱 인상 아니 공시 공바공라 뉴주스미 군데 장동도 저고 현상 장동기 숭라브레스로와 아니 콜로 타마도데 공제디 아니 레바 넘버 치비 콜로 스니티니 도대 공제디 아니 다치 신바 인상 니든 구송라브레 스미스미자베 오 딘데지 돈이 되시자고 그래스.
So if you don't understand the differences between all these different paradigms, then it's going to be difficult when you encounter different explanations later on. It would be harder to understand what's being said. So let's go through these. So first we have the Chittamatra, the mind-only school, and they assert that the first and second turnings of the wheel of Dharma are both provisional, whereas the third turning of the wheel of Dharma is definitive. And they're making that assessment based on their understanding that the provisional are those which are not to be taken literally, that are not literal. So that includes the first and second turning of the wheel of Dharma for them. They're not literally true. Whereas the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, the turning of the wheel that is the excellent discrimination, that one, which is primarily here referring to the Sandhitamochana Sutra, once again, that sutra unraveling the intent. And so that is definitive, and it is literal. It is literally true. The words are, meant to are literally what they they're exactly accurate as the words themselves are. They're literally true.
다 되니 우마랑주 바로 우마랑주 비체고 로벨 링데제당 로벨 시와소라 좋아 고난 쪽에 되니 마 지시 잡연데 콜로 당보로와 대시 초고디 장동기 수라인 바 찍바시 다 콜로 바바딜라더니 장동다 니든니 샤워와 콜로 방바딜라 베나 진지두숨 따보로와 붐 니지치제 동가다 보디 아니 니든기 수라브레스 아니 시라니 보디 장동기 수라브레스 오 두신이 콜로 바바딜라 아니 장동이 이지다 니든기 수라미 이게 니에 바지고 그래스 다 콜로 타마딜라 도대 공제 나나더니 된담 리우추어 티나는 된담 양다 파슈기 리우세디 아니 예든 숭랍레스 아니 저와 공제 점슈기 리우세죠 튼소디니 아니 장동 숭랍레스 뭐디니 콜로 바바들라 장동다 예든니 콜로 타마들라 장동 예든니 어디니 에와지고레스 근데서는 뒤 가서나 되는데 막 돈이 땡지 조시는 땡비잖니 아니 콜로 용진지도 숨데 돈이 우딘 땡지 조시는 때 많이 상이 된 것으로 실현이 못되게 돈이 우딘 땡지 조시는 때야 말이야 가서나 되는다 막 맞습니다 송야 말이야 랑싱이 맞습니다 송아디 다치신 바 캐리는 지고 말이야 심두산이 콜로니바 아니 실현이 못이 아니 장동 도레스 어딘지 송어레스 다 콜로 당부 아니 배 돈는다 먹고는 우딘 땡고는 매상 아니 장동 송라브레스 다 콜로 담아들라 되나면 한다 파슈 리우디기 되는데 먹어도 딘소 때 공대 점수라 소비 리우 하마든 속이 아니 구두대 마마도 주 되는데 마마대만상 아니 가스나 지 장동 수라브레스다 도단도 로벨인데지랑 로벨 시바소 고는 로와 장주비 아니 콜로 바바들라 장동당 예든니 콜로 담아들라 장동당 예든니 에와지고 그래서 콜로 당고디 장동랑 그래서 디 장동되다 되는데 먹어도 딘지 조신 때만데 좋네 딘저기 예와샤고 그래서
Shadow Nimbo Sana Niduma Yimbe Gizen Kaizana Judgeship Madagasana Rangshingi Drupa Madrup Sergio is a neon Rangshingi Drupa Yuris.
Or Ranshin Drupa killing or
Alas,
Maranju Ranshin Drupa race, Rashimado Yoma. What did it?
So then we have the next paradigm that we can look at is the Svatantrika Madhyamaka, or the autonomy, Middleway autonomy school. And that includes especially the masters or the authors, Laktinje Buddha, Bhava Viveka Roa, Bhava Viveka Re, Laktinje Sana Bhava Viveka Roa. Less, I think it's, Bhava Viveka, and then Shantarakshita are the authors that Geshe mentioned. And so here, this paradigm, they take the first turning of the wheel of Dharma is all provisional. The second turning of the wheel of Dharma has both provisional as well as definitive scriptures. The third turning of the wheel of Dharma also, and this is specifically even within that one sutra, the Sutra Unraveling the Intent, it has both provisional and definitive sections. So what's the reason that they're making these kinds of discrimination and this kind of categorizing here? Well, the first, in terms of the presentation, once again, of having the main content of the scripture with the explicit teaching being ultimate truth, then the first turning of the wheel of Dharma doesn't explicitly talk about the ultimate truth. So that's why they say that that's all provisional. And then the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, there's certain sutras like the three Great Mother Sutras, the large, middling, extensive, middling, and condensed Great Mother Sutras, where they have the explicit meaning of being the ultimate truth. But then you have other sutras in the middle turning of the wheel, like the Heart Sutra, which does not actually, because it's not literal. Here, the Heart Sutra is not literally true, because what it says is that phenomena do not inherently exist. But that is not literally true according to this paradigm of the Middleway autonomy school. So that sutra becomes provisional. And then in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, you have the chapter of Dundam Yandak Pak, which is, I guess, I don't know how the Lamrim text we have here renders this, but just the perfect ultimate Arya chapter, something like that. The chapter requested by the perfect perfect ultimate Arya. That one is is definitive because it refers to ultimate truth, and it has that as its main content, and it also is literally true. And then there are other sections of the sutra, like the chapter requested by I think it's something like the chapter requested by Maitreya. Dode Gongjagi Jambeshu Jamshila. Oh, yeah, so that was right. It's the chapter requested by Maitreya. That one is provisional because it's not, again, literally expressing the content, the subject matter of the ultimate truth.
콜로 당보단 콜로 바바들라 아니 뱅에든 숭라비 찹스와 콜로 타마들라 장동 숭라비 거래 찹스 어두스니 다 가르스는 콜로 당부 되는데 막 어디 든지 쏘시는 때 말해스 와 가르스는 템바시디 아니 되는다 말랑 신기 마주 막 어디 든지 쏘시는 때네 어디 이상 아니 콜로 당부 등 예든 숭라 아니 콜로 바바드니 가르스는 예와니 마제와체 아니 기리두스미 나를 시라니 모이나를 니가 기더니 가스나 랑싱 마주밤 되는다 마주바 니가 오다 어디 든지 소치니 땜바 인상 콜로 파발라야 니든 그 숭랍 인고레스 다 콜로 탐미 값은 아니 가스나지 되는데 뭐 어디 든지 소치니 땜요 말레스 마데 인상다 장등 숭랍레스 오다 독신이다 반년 다와 루베 선제장 반년 다와 잡고 물로 그런다 오마 탄주비 개베 오다 독순 제와 지워레 디인도선에다 람림 첨부 공부 시작이나 다 강기 말아서 케랭스나 강기 시작 도어스나 다 루베 선제장 반년 다와 잡고 공부 나신신이 콜로 당보다 바발라 아니 녀등 수로 인고와 콜로 타말라 장등 수로 인고와데 다디 케레네 된다 람림 첨부 공부데 오다 디 시작인 도어레스
And then we arrive at the final paradigm that we are looking at, which is the Middleway consequence school, the Madhyamaka Prasangika. And so within this school, and this is primarily, especially referring to the authors and the masters, Buddha Palita, as well as Chandakirti. And so within their perspective, the first turning of the wheel of Dharma is all definitive. It's if something is a teaching of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, it's necessarily definitive scripture. And likewise with the middle turning of the wheel of Dharma. So this time there's no division between some being provisional and others being definitive, whether it's the three Mother Sutras, the small, middling, or extensive Mother Sutras, whether it's the Heart Sutra, all of those are definitive here. And then the third turning of the wheel of Dharma are all provisional. Third turning is all provisional. So what's the reason they give for this? And in this paradigm, we see that in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, because it's expressing as its main content the four truths, the four noble truths, where in emptiness or ultimate truth is an aspect of that, then they assert that this is also a definitive sutra because it does have ultimate truth as the main subject matter. And likewise, the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, those all have the emptiness, the lack of inherent existence, the lack of ultimate existence. That all is, the emptiness of inherent existence, the emptiness of ultimate existence, the emptiness of nature. That is the main content or subject matter that is explicitly taught in the middle turning. Whereas the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, it does not have as its main content the explicit teaching of the ultimate truth. So it is not, it is provisional. And so when we go through the rest of the text here in the Lamrim, the section on great insight, then we're looking at the provisional and definitive from this point of view of the final paradigm here, the Middleway consequence school, the Prasangika Madhyamaka.
다 지난주 개와 따고는 제르미지게 가와송을 내가 림치문을 마송화 되어서 장엘리 신인고스니 로수 로 빼제지 로수 배 장도당에 된 거를 코랑 배 시우지 자치 못정도 답에 동관이 꼴라배 그 시우지 카스고 순조 중지열에서 어 디나나 제르미지게 계신게와 송화 인상 디나 돌도지 독스마 레베 군센티네레스 인도전에 다 개와 따고는 박일리 신인분을 따나 티고르티베 카스고 군센 제레니베 롱당이 송여레스 어디스나 도스니 어디네 잠시 어디.
And so there's one so if you have a desire to look into this in greater detail in this explanation of the differences between the Chittamatra and then the Prasangika Madhyamaka, Svatantika Madhyamaka, and their perspectives on the definitive and provisional. Where do you find in more detail? It's not actually here in the Lamrim Chenmo, but another text by Jit Tsongkhapa, which is called the Essence of Eloquence, Distinguishing Provisional from Definitive. And so this text really goes, J. Rinpoche went to a huge amount of detail about these three different paradigms, these three different schools, and why, what their reasoning is and how they look at the different turnings of the wheel dharma to determine which is provisional and which is definitive. And also it has extensive explanations about emptiness in that text. I don't know if maybe someone can write into the chat box if you know the title of an English publication of this. I know there's one by Robert Thurman, which I don't know if it's the entire text, but at least I think it might be. And then there's some portions of it. I know that Jeffrey Hopkins has translated, so maybe if anyone wants to know those later, we can look them up, or if someone knows, please type them. That's all.
당은 섭지 니바가 마마 쪽이 니바 루루 공부 뒤에 술 치다 중간이스 다 된다 디니마다 다 된다 장도에 수능 모시는 다 공부 루루 비로와 아니 디 장도에 좀 좀면 순조고 수업 되더니 마 공부 제술라 공부 루루당 공부 루루기 제수 충조고 우마번주 공부 제수 가리 요래스 다 디고디 남도 디나나 순도스 다 디니마 루기스.
So now we're moving on to the second heading, which is here on page 115, 2, the history of commentary on Nagarjuna's intended meaning. Nagarjuna gave flawless commentary on the scriptures. Oh, sorry. So yeah, I didn't actually start reading yet. So this is where we're going to look at the Guardian Nagarjuna and his way of teaching about, commenting on this the emptiness, and then those who followed him and how they commented on this lack of inherent existence.
어두체 다대들 최탐지 정신이 깨와당 가봐서 지양매바 뜸비 시진기 돌아 소비 송럽 친지 말로베 제비 루루기 공과 제비 림바치들 중냠나스 딜라 파발하니스 로베 산제장당 린덴제당 안 다와 잡바당 시와솔라 소비 우마바 첨부 남지장 로벤단 다와 세마르 제베스 얍세니가 우마바 시에 남지 쿵이베 나라바 남지 디니라 슝 첨부 우마바 시에 당스 보다 독신이 시에 남장 시에 남라 초진기 우마바 시에 탄예체도 다든다 디가스나 다 공부루기 다지당 지당 좀nen디기와 콜로 파비값으로와 시징이 도대를 무지스나 콜로 파바르와 어다 최담지랑 신기 마주비 돈이 개바 송사기 좀nen디기 슝디 콜로 파바 시징 도대를 무지값 송가리 어다 디기 공부 친지 말로바 된다 마 친지 말로바 되게 공부루기 마 아니 다 디제수 중조로베 공부루기 제수 중조거든이 아니 개바 수수수스니다 지당 우마바 망보여라 이나다 나렌데 벤디다다 쪼쪼도든다 디나 뛰니 배나 아니 공부루기 있더니 로마 anglo lobe 파발하 세르와 단진다 아지 거리를 아야 되었습니다. 시자바와 시자바 제겐들와 다 공부루기 우마르 쪼쪼 라소바 슝망부 슈제 로베 파발하게 아니 시자바 라소바다 슝제니 어떤 우마비 슝디 마송다 디제수 장경게더니 로베 산제장 로와 디젤라드니 로베 랭텐지 아니 로베 반년 다와 잡아 로와 다 진진 시와소 라소바 다 우마바 티조 디장 아니 로베 파발라디 아니 공부루주 낭신기더니 베 이치비 다쿵 장사디로와 아니 공부루주라야 다 베나 로베 산제장당 로베 랭텐지스 로베 산제장데 우마 탄주비 신다 수지 바 우마 탄주비 수디 바 로수 제게 로베 랭텐지디 우마 랑주비 수라 수 로수제 다 반년 다와 잡아당 반년 다와 잡아디 달로베 산제냥게 제수 단에 반데니 우마 탄주비 슝비 바 로수 로베 시와 쪽에 되니 우마 랑주비 디나네 나주주부 우마 랑주바스니 수 로수 어 디인도서니 다 로벤 공부루주당 로벤 파발라니디 아니 된다 우마 탄주바다 우마 란주비 되는 로벤 몽부지도와 고나주기 아니 배 쿵뚝사기 슝치무 우마바 스니로와 아니 배 tindigi다 배 시우지 쿵뚝사 지와다 병아라베 밍디라 아니 고난이라 슝치무 우마발라 아니 신다두들라 아니 초용증이 우마바 스니네 밍다요 그래서 된다 가서는 로베 산제 장에 공부를 주당 로베 파발라기 공부하되 우마 탄주빌구라 추제바리 그러와 다 로벨인데 지게 우마 탄주빌 우스제와데 지금 말했어 우마 란주도 네그레스 냥추 로벨인데 지게 로베 산제 장라 가바자베로와 아니 또기 봐 셰라주미 청와서보다 슝제니 아니 로베 산제 장라 가바자베로와 슝주는 쯧바 중요해 어다 두치디 다 로베 산제 장단 로벨인데 지니 파데 수대신 지기시나 공부를 주다 파발라 이 공부 아니 우마 공부디 탄주도 네그레 로베 산제 장에 탄주비 신디 소라수 그러와 다 로벨인데 제 라소바 코나족이 아니 랑주고 공수바 송니 된다도도 다 코나조라 아니 로벨 산제잖아 로벨인데 제 코조라 초용진스나 다 초수 제와르와 지기 탄주비 초라제 지기 우마 랑주비 초라파 초 니수 개바르와 인도자니 초진지고 우마바 스니 민틴데 다고레스 로벨 파발라 당 공부루니기 우마베기와 최담제 대바 마주비 랑신 치르시와마도 지 랑신이 마주와 당 주비 예와디 세가 마드마 인상 아니 우마베 슝치우 그랬더니 쿵뚝사도디 공부루주당 로벤 파발라 니리와 두제 로베 산지쟁게 다 되는다마 마두세디 랑싱이 마두발라 파제니와 되는다마 랑싱이 마두 랑싱이 주바 메스 우마 탄주고 공바 다 로베 렌데지게 랑싱이 주바 요레스 이네 되는다마 주바디 데마두바디 요마스니 다 우마 탄주바다 랑주바니라 케바가르스나 우마 탄주베 값은 대연담바 마주바 마세 랑싱기 주바데 요마리 최담지 똑비다섬레 다 로벨인데 지기 아니 가리레 최담지 랑싱기 마주바 마리 랑싱기 주바레스 로와 랑싱기 주바레데 덴바 마주바레스 로와 오 인도산이다 다 된다도도 로벨 산제잖아 로벨인데 지다 단주바다 랑주비다 쯧바쯧서디 아니 랑싱기 주바 유메기 강 쯧바쯧미로와 최담지 똑비다섬레 승인지 단주바체 아니 린데 루벨인데 지기 최근에 또베다서 말했어 군다기 최도 또베다서 레모도 지기 시원도 용주도 아니 지랑싱이 좀 나서나 지 또베다서 말해 랑게 친이기 주바래 스르와 오 두신 시tum나 또베다서 이미 차와 요 말해 다오 딘제기 돈이 되니 우마바들라 마 제단디도 신 따와 때라 밥당 좀 쩌발라 민다와 제바 요 말했어 따와디 마두신 돈이 때라 밥당게 사무 돈이 때라 밥당게 거니 아니 병아라비게 탄예디 아니 공부루당 로베 파발라 니기 랑싱 주바 유메기 세가메상 우마 슝치모 우마 바스 다 우마 로벨인데 제당 로베 산지장라 코나조 아니 초용진 우마 바스 빈이 다 독신다 탄예 다의 윤신 딘데 레데레스
So read a little bit. Nagarjuna gave flawless commentary on scriptures, e.g. the perfection of wisdom sutras that teach that all phenomena are without any intrinsically existent production, cessation, and so forth. What is the history of commentary on Nagarjuna's thought? Both the father, Nagarjuna, and his spiritual son, Aryadeva, are sources for the other Madhyamakas. Even great Madhyamakas, such as the masters Buddhapalita, Bhavavik, Chandakirti, and Shantarakshita, took Aryadeva to be as authoritative as the master Nagarjuna. Therefore, earlier Tibetan scholars used the term Madhyamikas of the fundamental texts for those two, and the term partisan Madhyamikas for the others. So here there's these little a way of explaining how Nagarjuna and Aryadeva, these two are really the primary scholars that are the kind of universally accepted Madhyamaka masters. So there are many different, so here we're looking at some of the primary Madhyamaka masters who came after Nagarjuna. So everyone here's, first we have Nagarjuna, right? He's the originator of the Madhyamaka paradigm, Madhyamaka school. And so after him, there were many different scholars, and we say mostly from the Nalanda university, Nalanda Monastery. And here we're looking at some of the major ones, right? The most well-known and the most important ones. And so his own direct disciple was Aryadeva. And so, so Nagarjuna, first of all, he's the one that gave commentary on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which he gave a flawless commentary, or completely, commentary without any distorted views in it of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And then following him came these other masters, and his direct disciple was Aryadeva. Out of all of these other masters, Aryadeva was the only one who was a direct disciple. And so those two then are sort of the kind of, right, they're universally accepted. So there's this term applied to them as madhyamikas of the fundamental texts. Now, what started happening later is that there was then some kind of back and forth debate and disagreement by the later authors. So you had Buddha Palita, Bhavavika, Chandrakirti, Shantarakshita. Now, Buddha Palita is recognized as the founder or the trailblazer, going back to that term that was used before, but the trailblazer or founder of the Prasangika Madhyamaka, the consequence school. And following in his direction was Chandrakirti. Chandrakirti kind of took up Buddha Palita's position as being the most correct. And Bhava Viveka then actually came after Buddha Palita, and he debated, or he saw faults in some of Buddha Palita's position. So he gave reasons to disprove or to negate some of the positions of Buddha Palita. And then following him, Bhava Viveka, was Shantarakshita. So Shantarakshita took the positions of Bhava Viveka and not of Buddha Palita. So you see how there's this division that occurred in their interpretations following Nagarjuna and Aryadeva. So Nagarjuna and Aryadeva, they just, they weren't really explicit on this one question that came later. Oh, and so that's why these later scholars are also known as the partisan madhyamikas, because they broke up into different camps, and so the later scholars all had to choose whether they were going to fall into the camp of the Prasangika, or, and I didn't mention, but Bhava Viveka is the founder of the Svatantrika Madhyamaka, the autonomy school. So you have to choose, the other scholars all have to choose whether they're going to be Prasangika or fall into the Svatantrika camp. And so what is the actual debate here about? Well, it's something that Nagarjuna and Aryadeva, they didn't actually really explicitly state. So what they stated is that phenomena do not ultimately exist. Phenomena do not truly exist. Okay, that was clear in the text of Nagarjuna and Aryadeva, and that's accepted by all of the later Madhyamaka commentators as well. But where they disagree is on the question of whether phenomena inherently exist or not, with all phenomena inherently exist or not. Now, when we say the word, just as a note in the terminology in English, the term inherently exist is the probably most common way of rendering this. Another way you could render it is that they do not exist with a nature. Could also use that phrasing. So from whether phenomena exist with a nature or not. So the Prasangika, that's Buddha Palita and those that came into his camp, they assert that all phenomena are merely imputed by conceptuality, merely imputed by conceptual thought. And so that not only do they not ultimately exist, that they don't truly exist, but in addition, all phenomena do not inherently exist. Right? All phenomena do not exist by nature or with a nature. So in contradistinction to that, then Bhava Viveka, the autonomy school, they assert that phenomena, there are phenomena which inherently exist. The only phenomena which are merely imputed by conceptuality are those which we can call the imputed phenomena. That's a technical term that comes in the sutra, the unraveling the intent, but it's these imputed phenomena that are merely imputed by conceptuality. But the other dependent phenomena and the thoroughly established phenomena, those do exist inherently. Those do have a nature. So that is the debate that came between those scholars.
아니 우마비 따와스는 우마바스는 틴데지라 강사지라 와 틴데 켈랭게 강사지나 우마바스 다디 우마베기 따와디 아니 좀 된데 일단 군다 신라 펜에다 로시비아 지라 아니 고물루두기다 쇠 로아타 마냐바디아 쇠체는 우마비 쇠 신다 쇠신데 고물루두 다 고물루두기 쇠 치베 지라 아니 고물루두기다 우마르조 투고네다 간다 우마비다 템바 마투비 둔진 베든 개부 쉬우지 다 우마 저서 두나나 다 마세부 쉬우지 마 송여와 어다 디마 송인데 다 템바 마투바 세디나나 템바 둠마투기 남샤디 땡중이 비 둔진기 템바 마투바 마도지기 랑싱이 마투바 세기 세가디 디메상 다 디레 로스 디니르와 템바 마투비 동니디 랑싱기 로아다 마투비 동니라 디니 추 공바지게 로비 산제 얘기 디니 우마 탄주바 세 따와디 트 우마 탄주바다 랑주바세디 제로와 오니 가스나 우마 탄주비 신다 수 되는데 고물루기 다 우마바 지용데 마송아레 마도지 우마 탄주비디 세가 요 말이스 다디 우마 탄주비 때 세가 되는데 로베 산제 장게 되니 어 데모마도 아마세 토연 랑싱이 두바야 요 말이스와 안 최담지 똑비 따섬레 랑싱이 두바 뒤점에 요 말이스 오단 최담지 랑싱이 마주바 따겐기로와 틴데기 켈랭기로와 오다 두다 요나 오다디 우마 탄주비 두다 디 켈랭이 강사들 우마 탄주바스 다 우마 랑주바스디 아니 데레 로고수지야 랑싱기 마주바 세디 디마레스 뎀바 마주비자 랑싱기 두바레스 누자니 뎀바 두바다 랑싱 두바라 예와 로와친 로와 아니 최담지 똑비 따서 마레스 로와 똑비 따서 마레 랑싱기 마주바 마레스 다 뎀바 마주바스 얘기 제시디 우마 탄주바당 우마 랑주바니 떼지 미다와 차네 와 달로 느메라 나왕기 다든다 디고디 진다 올라 당서 동니 고리 시에디 디고도 카세우 제우 쉬우지 되는 거와 어 딘데지 당샤와 다 딘나네 우마 랑주바들라야 난스기 니 예와 체고 도대주부 우마 랑주바당 나주주부 우마 랑주바스와 로벨링데지디 도대주부 우마 랑주바 로벨링데지디 우마 랑주비 신다 수지 샤워와 디가스나 안 뎀바주비 최 뒤자만 메징스 로와 랑싱기 주바 시지기 때문에 덴바 마주비 남샤 때라 바겐딜라 로벨링데지 다 로벨링데지기 아니 가리래 치드 로와 치르든도 두발 요래 선딘 도드비 치든 켈레바 낭싱인신이 된 탄얘기 남샤 도드비 남샤도 튜바인자 도드주부 우마랑 주바 스니 로수지 다 로벨 시바주기 난주주부 우마랑 주바 스디 치든 요 말레스 로와 치든 덴바 마주진 치르든도 두바 메오마세 덴바 두바 메와냠도 제니 마주바 켈리메 전에 난주주바스나 심잠베기 때니 남샤 다오지 켈리니 심잠베 나신야 차장 말어 심잠베 덴바 두바 켈린 거라 고나도 덴바 마주바스 와 인도산이 다 로베 시바주게 난주주부 우마랑 주비 쓰여디 때니 다 우마랑 주발라 도대주바당 난주주바스 니레바레스 어디 첸도 다 된다 디값수 시엔데 다 고물루두디 우마베신다 쓰제체 다 로베 산예장디 우마 탄주비신다 쓰제체 로베 린데지디 도대주부 우마랑 주비신다 쓰제 랑주비신다 쓰제레 난주주부 우마랑 주비신다 쓰제다 로베 시바소스 디첸데 다 반된 다와 잡아다와 오니 로베 까말라시라 혼나조다 로반된 다와 잡아디 우마 탄주비신다 쓰징게 로와 로베 산예장게 제수장네 다 로베 까말라시라디 아니 켄진 시와조게 제수장네 우마랑 주비 제수장네로와 누치엔데 다 우마반낭로라 낭스기 누치니 카지 다 디튼다 가르스나 동니 덴바 마주비 동니디 탄주 점기고네로와 아니 마르텔라 파바인자 탄주바 덴바 마주비 동니디 탄주 점 마레스 랑주기 딘지지 거거레스 나인도 랑주바스 오다 딘데치니다 우마반낭스기 에와체니 딘데 중림지 시 딘마 퇴퇴고레스 오둑스
그나 딜로 배철로 마스마
아페절로메 뭐 디틴다 디 우마
So this is giving further explanation about what was read previously. So there was no more of the text that was just read. So we have within Buddhism, there are 4 paradigms, especially when we look at, Buddhism in India and the scholars who commented on the Buddhist teachings and the sutras over the course of history of Buddhism in India. We can find these 4 Buddhist paradigms or schools, and there's one of them is this Madhyamaka, the Middleway school. And so what does it mean to be Madhyamaka? For someone to have the perspective or view of Madhyamaka, it's someone who accepts that all phenomena are empty of true existence, but conventionally the understanding of agent and action, object and object, not action, agent and object. There we go. Conventionally an understanding of agent and object is appropriate and tenable, logically tenable. So that is someone who believes that, accepts that position, is Madhyamaka. So then within Madhyamaka, then we have, again, the history of it was that 400 years after the Buddha's passing, the Guardian Nagarjuna came and he elaborated this view of the Madhyamaka after it had degenerated already in the world. So he reinstituted it. He's considered the founder, but really the sort of reinstitutor, the one who rejuvenated it. So then you have this, main kind of reasoning that's accepted as the reason for phenomena not being truly existent, is that they are dependently arisen. So phenomena are dependently arisen is a reason given for not being truly existent. Then you have, what does that really mean to say phenomena are not truly existent? There's a question that can come up, right? So the question is answered differently by other commentators that came after Nagarjuna. So when you have those who say that the emptiness of phenomena not being truly existent really is the emptiness of phenomena not being inherently existent, the emptiness of having a nature, the emptiness of nature. That's someone who asserts that is now a prasangika madhyamaka. They are consequentialist. So if someone, so they say that there's not even an atom of inherent existence. That is an umatogirpa or prasangika madhyamaka. Then you have the other camp, which is the svatantrika madhyamaka or the autonomy school. And so they assert that actually there are phenomena which inherently exist. There are phenomena that have natures. So their understanding of phenomena being empty of true existence they say that being empty of true existence isn't the same thing as being empty of inherent existence. So then, so this particular, way that they each give for explaining the meaning of, how they interpret the words empty of true existence, that is going to be explained later on in the, in depth in the coming portions of the text. So we won't get into that right now. So then we have that there are these, 2 different schools and 2 different kind of approaches. And again, even within that, we have now within the second one of the Svatantrika, we have different understandings of conventional truths. And there are some who assert that that external objects exist. And they have a perspective regarding external objects that's similar to the Svatantrika paradigm, the Svatantrika system. That's called the Sutra school sometimes. So they're called the Middleway autonomy school following Sutra, not following Sutra, but the Middleway Sutra autonomy school. And then that includes so the kind of primary proponent of that is Baba Viveka. And then you have those whose view aligns, when it comes to conventional truth, their view aligns more with the Chittamatra, the mind only. And so they believe that there are no external objects, that external objects don't exist. So that those are called the middle way, autonomy, the mind, it's not mind only here, they use the term the Yogacharya, which I guess in English we say the yoga practitioners or something. Yoga, anyway, the Yogacharya Madhyamika Svatantrika, the middle way autonomy practicing yoga, you can say maybe. But anyway, Yogacharya, it means the same thing as Chittamatra. So those are those who as position of regarding external objects is more in line with the Yogacharya or Chittamatra, meaning they don't believe in external objects. So that's primarily propounded by Shantarakshita. So we really can look at it. So we look at, again, like historically, who wrote, who developed the various views regarding Madhyamika. And so we have, again, the founder who really resuscitated and brought back to life the Madhyamika view, was the Guardian Nagarjuna. Then you have, who is it that founded the Prasangika school? That is Buddha Palita. Then when you have this this division within the Svatantrika, the autonomy school, so we can say that the Sutra autonomy school was founded by Bhava Viveka, whereas the Yogacharya autonomy school was founded by Shantarakshita. And then you also look at sort of the later followers, and you have that Chandrakirti, another Madhyamika scholar that we study. He was a follower of Buddha Palita. And then Kamalashila, he was a follower of Shantarakshita. So then these are sort of the main scholars of Madhyamika that are studied in the present day, some of the main ones. And so that's their relation to Nagarjuna and their different ways of interpreting. So that's why when we can say that there's this distinction now, that when you look at the terms actually that are used to refer to these schools, we said consequence school and the autonomy school. And why is this the case? Because it's just about the way in which you prove emptiness. So you can prove emptiness according to the consequence school. You can prove emptiness by way of using a logical consequence, a kind of reasoning that utilizes consequential or a reductio ad absurdum reasoning. Whereas for the Sautrantrika or the autonomy school, the only way that you can prove emptiness is by using a flawless sign of which is not really sure, but this is the best translation, but I don't know a better one. But you can say an autonomous sign or reason, an autonomous sign or reason. But anyway, I hope maybe again I didn't really explain what those mean, so I guess I'll just leave it there, and that's all I can say. I think so.
탄예도 치료여봐 되게 도대주비 우마바당 탄예도 치료여봐 되고 난주비 우마바오스 다 갈스나다 디 갈송을스나다 진다디 우마바 낭세기다 샤당들이 망부지 다기 쉬이마 보다 디치용 디체 다 데라 나라바다 가시기로와 민다당양 견산데 당도스와 우마바라더니 된담 와다 뎀베아더니 케렌주기 온도시네 우마비 민다당직 단위 군속된 바 체림비도네 우마바샤다 민다와 니도네 민다단들 얘기도 다 된다데 단위 군속비 좀 아니 체린주고니 민다단들아 아니 가스나 치료 여바로와 치료 되 여바 체림비 전에 아니 도대체 우마바세지당 아니 와 치료 메바 디베 우마바찬에 난주지 우마바스다 치료 되었으나 디레 와 낭 셰발이 제신비 치료기 숙소비 최지 와 딘데지 요바 켈림바이나 아니 치료되는 요바 켈림바스 와 오다 디 치료되는 요바 켈림비 우마비 온도 제발이나 도대체 우마랑 줘봐 다낭 딘데 치료기 된 메바 켈림비 아니 딘데기 나 온도 제발이나 나주지 우마바스 우마발라 딘데 군속 켈림비 고네 민니도스 다게도스
In the past, there were some Tibetan teachers who said that when Madhyamikas are described in terms of how they posit conventionalities, there are two types. Sautantika Madhyamikas, who assert the external objects exist conventionally, and Yogacharya Madhyamikas, who assert that external objects do not exist conventionally. Madhyamikas are also of two types when described in terms of how they assert the ultimate. The proponents of rationally established illusion assert that a compositive so again, that didn't go that far. So here we have now a presentation, or just a brief, really, introduction to the sorry, something happened with the headphones. I think it just, you can hear me? Can I go there? Oh. So then there's just this brief kind of explanation about different ways that other past Tibetan masters had, I guess it's the word, labeled or divided the different types of Madhyamikas. So one of the ways was in terms of differences in perspective of ultimate truth, and then another way is in differences of perspectives of conventional truths. So in terms of the differences of perspectives of conventional truths, so it's kind of like an odd way that is not really commonly accepted, the way that these past masters did it, but for the ultimate truth. But for the conventional truth, they have this, for the way of distinguishing those that assert that external objects exist conventionally, those are the Sautantika. Now that means that, again, the Sutra school, right? The Sutra school Madhyamikas or Sautantika. And then those that assert that external objects do not exist are the Yogacharya Madhyamikas. And so here, when they say like external objects exist, it means that they assert that there are form, there exists form or matter, which is of a distinct substance from consciousness. So those who assert that are the Sutra school Madhyamikas, and those who do not assert that external objects don't exist, those are the Yogacharya Madhyamika.
Nawala Juba number and Cheba some Tundam Demba Debe, Rabdu Minebi, Rabdu Mineba Mawos, Tining Amani, Lubin, Shiwata, Kamashila, Soba, Imba Delas, Kumatabu, Rabdu Minebe, Tanini, Kahar, Lubin, Kajija to do. Studying the Dikasana, that Tundam Demba, Tundam Dembe, Killing to want to Chene, Yang Uma Ming Tatanjila, and Kumar Jubi Umaba Sejidan. Rabdu Minib Umar Bas Niki Tanishini, or the Bena Jumari Juba said it and the Kanis Pongara, that the Kaji Chiachina, Nando Nizo, Tendam Deba doing it, Nando Nizosna, and it shut them to Demba Jua Nangyang, Demba Majuba, what Demba Jua Nangyang, Demba Jubi Tonga, Nang Demba Jua Nawarity, in a Demba Jua Mare, Nangwa Tonga, Demba Jua Nangyang. Demba Majubas, there are Dendon Jumatabus, Namdu Dinishi, who are Dendon Jumatabus, or T. Tunam Demba Dugan Gedine, Umabadala, Jumar Jube, Umabas in the Dusin, Jumar Jubas, or Tindi Umabi Mingi Tagados. Da, and it Tin Casna, or Duchinida Casna, Nangwa, Juba Tamche, Gabi, Megabashi. Mega Bashi Tinit, what in the Vidua, and in Gaja in Dinit, Demba Juba, what in the Juba Ganga Namba Chebi, and it Tunum Demba Bashi doing Tunum Dembarua, Mega, that Dorsuduna, and it turned Damba Gaja Gabi Tsugi, and it Gasna Namba Chezamki, what in it, Mega Gate in it, Tunum Demba Dugandela, Rabdu Minebu Umabas. That Tini Nani Lobe Shivato, Lobe Kamala Shivati, Nando Nizo Gate in Kumar Nizo to them about doing Kumar Jubu Umabas in the Shagidos, or Tindition is Shah, and Jumatabu Rabdu Minebe, Tani Jagi Lobe Tadi, Pungaraba Mase, and Jagi Cheba Nalayang, and Kumar Jubu Umabachidan, Rabdu Minebu Umabas in the Tani Tashas. That did not do Karsana. Juma Tindegita Umabala Ming Tatandra, Chidun Kelibu Umaba to Dujibu Umaba, Chidun Kemilu Umadra, Nanjuba said the Tani on the chip. Twendam Watini, Tony Kilendang on the Chevaina, Nando Nizugi Umabachidang, and then Cousin Rabdu Mini Umabas, or the Dindigi, Tanya Tashas, or that the Pungarabitatan, what the Jeremy Ranglu Mebache, Tag Pungar Namana in the Tashas, or the Digi Deshidamus.
Madhyamikas are also of two types when described in terms of how they assert the ultimate. The proponents of rationally established illusion assert that a composite of appearance and emptiness is an ultimate truth. And the proponents of thorough non-abiding assert that the mere elimination of elaborations with regard to appearances is an ultimate truth. These earlier teachers asserted that within the second typology, the first type includes masters such as Santarakshita and Kamalashila. There were also some Indian masters who used the terms illusion-like and thoroughly non-abiding to refer to different types of madhyamikas. So this particular way of labeling and dividing up the different different interpreters of madhyamika is not what Tsongkhapa himself accepts as sort of the most valid or appropriate way to do so. He's just reporting, he's just citing an older way that other scholars had done previously. So the way that this is done was, so first we had a division in terms of positions about conventional truth, and now there's a distinction in positions of the ultimate truth. So here, in terms of their way of accepting ultimate truth, you have the one called the proponents of first of all, it's proponents of rationally established illusion. So here is talking about how the composite of appearance and emptiness is the meaning of ultimate truth or emptiness. So the composite of appearance and emptiness here means all phenomena appear to be truly established, yet they are not truly established. So there's the appearance of all phenomena, the appearance of phenomena is truly established, yet they are not truly established. So they're empty of true establishment. So there's the union or the composite of appearance and emptiness. And so we have this phrase, illusion-like appearance and emptiness, illusion-like appearance and emptiness. And then you have the next way of the next, group in this way of dividing the madhyamikas, proponents of thorough non-abiding. So here, like it says, they assert that the mere elimination of elaborations is the ultimate truth. So this is the ones who assert the first type are said to be Santarakshita and Kamalashila. And then you have these terms and other similar terms like illusion-like and thoroughly non-abiding. They also were used not only by earlier Tibetan masters, but also even in Indian texts from Indian masters. So again, these are, two different ways. So one way was explaining in terms of the different positions on conventional truth, and the other way is different positions on ultimate truth.
다칠 우마바 케체비 갸비그 로빈 가레 대답되바 유미 장스 로빈 루두기 제수장에 우마바 첨부 남기 루치다린 때라 아바 자이 처문 남샤식 셰바 갈라니 스타틴다 디가스나 다진다 디나라 딘다 다지르미지기다 가스나 고무 루두 조체 디 제수장에 되니 벽이 되니 나라 차치죠 야간나 차치죠 틴주그 대반조 마두스 되니 아니 디나라 테바하리 미테바하리 디 제시자치도 내고 말도 지기 지당 우마바 인제 감각이 되었고는 그 투여거려 요 말이 있어와 무슨 딘다 디나라 나라비 딘다 디 된담도수다 단위도수고 온도신 시단직 디나신 오다 디 제수더니 로베시와서 인다 김디니마 방송중이다 로베 모부지기 마 되바디 마 조용도와 튼소 다 조조조 마 주니 아니 티 나더니 강기 태발에 강기 밑에 바디 올라다 뜻이 잡여와 튼저기 남샤디 시기 스마도 지기 지당 아니 지금 우마바 따와 켈링게 아니 지 자갈롱바 자가게 되니 벤지다 자가나라 몽부 쇼지다 나래를 나한테 변나네 튼저기다 우마비 되바되고 몽부여데 강가게 되바 레레 샤니든 티지다 말이 때는 아니 베디 투즈 다 가서는 지슝 나와다 이거 뭐 차고로 딘데신이 뭐다 조 그 딘데신 마 뜻이 때문에 아 때라 마 송아인 스저미지
Broadly speaking, there were some Indian and Tibetan masters who claimed to be Madhyamikas who used this kind of terminology for dividing Madhyamikas. However, here I aim to establish only the systems of the great Madhyamikas who are followers of the master Nagarjuna, who could explain every subtle distinction. So what Tsongkhapa is pointing out here is that there were so many different positions about Madhyamaka, so many followers of the Madhyamaka who had slightly different takes, slightly different assertions. And so it would just be way too long of a text. It would be way too much to put all of those assertions into this text that's to follow. So Tsongkhapa is saying that he's just going to focus on the primary ones. He's going to focus on those main sort of most important masters and describe their various positions and explain which of those is more reasonable, more tenable, which is less tenable, less reasonable, which ones make sense and which ones don't. Yes.
틴다디나나다 저미지 가스나 아예 강라 아니 지 가리래 틴다 단얘기 남샤도 두고니 칠도 켈레마다 밀비 아니 우마바샤단직 된담 켈린주 고니 규마주 주비 우마바다 rab도 미니 우마바스니 샤단니 나니 틴다디 아니 가스나 된담 조수고니다 가스나지 가리 낭도 니소 된담 데바 되별라 규마리 주바 아니 르와 네 가자 주반 넘바 제섬기 메가 바식 드비차네 아니 잡도 미니비 우마바슨 되디 안 따다 되기면도 우스 저미제 가서는 디 미디와디 로자와 론데 셰랍기 슈나라 아니 디베 가서나 케바 구와집이 디니 깨자 말했다 케바라 잡이 디니 제시 세대 말했어 디 가서나 몽바 아니 가마시게 졸라디니 베 딘제 디니 칼라르 워설게 왔습니다 주주 함상상 지역이 니주로 오지마도 지 디 세대 디 가스나 닝 다수 세대 말해스 어디 송한 낭신 저름지 다가랑 내 말해스 다디 윤진도 올라시 송 거래 인도전에 된담 조수원에 낭도니소 유마주 주바 세디 야드니 닝다나 지금 민도 저름지 오다 된다 디 미디와데 로베 로자와 론데 셰랍기로와 아니 마 송샤 어디 송바디 덴덴 다른 레샤스 디 대기민도 송바다 미디비 윤진도 대화라 송도와
Moreover, the great translator Lodin Sherab makes an excellent point when he says that this presentation of two types of Madhyamikas, distinguished according to how they assert the ultimate, is simply something to impress fools. So here Tsongkhapa is referring to what was in the above paragraph, where there was those two distinctions of Madhyamikas in terms of their assertions of conventional truth, and then in terms of their assertions of ultimate truth. So their assertions in terms of ultimate truth had the proponents of rationally established illusion, where they asserted composite of appearance and emptiness is ultimate truth, and then the proponents of thorough non-abiding, where they asserted that the mere elimination of elaborations with regard to appearances is ultimate truth. So now Tsongkhapa is referencing the great translator Lodin Sherab is saying that it's simply something to impress fools, meaning, it's something that only for, people who, aren't, really fully, not really experts or, really understanding well the Madhyamaka who make this kind of distinction. So his main point is that it is not a valid distinction to make amongst the different Madhyamaka views, and it will explain why after this. Okay, but here our time is actually up, so we want to leave time for questions. So if there's any question, we'll start taking those now.
I have a question. in reading about emptiness, a couple of the statements I've heard are that the self is not the same as the aggregates, and that the self is not different from the aggregates. Is that a fairly adequate way to begin studying emptiness? I mean, do those phrases make sense?
So you're asking, so do those phrases make sense is
that
one question, and
I mean, is that an adequate way to understand emptiness in the aggregates?
so by learning the meaning of those phrases, is that a good way to understand emptiness? Is that sort of what you're saying?
Is that a true basic comprehension of it? I mean, is the self is not the same as the aggregates, but the self is also not different from the aggregates. I mean, it seems to be a lot of middle ground in there.
Well, so should I ask him though, is that just like, can he explain what that means? Is that a good way to ask the question?
Thank you.
Again, 단다 주당 돈이 저시게도 간라 아니 직디 mambo 통이 두서 직디 mambo 통이 요리 다 다디 풍보 등 다디 풍보 등 직버 말이스 풍보에 타대양 말이스 다 풍문 레시면 된다고 하셔라 레시면 되라면 되네 다 건다 믹서기 룸 샤면도 왜냐면 된다 소소라 최상 단다 다디 풍보 등 직버 많이 타대양 많이스 세에 디 고네 돈이 로정 돈이 간라 로정 제나이 직 고아 딱딱 레기레베스 아니 직디기 다 직디 고아 간데스 고고레 그나 직디 된다 간데스 고고레
다든가 디 꼬디 인다 타등을 좀 봤습니다. 인다 데와 돈이 막에 나가와 아니 강사 다음에 때라 봐요. 타등을 좀 봤어야지. 인다 디 올라 되는 거지. 와 다든가 디 꼬라 제시 쇼기고 되는 거지. 와 타등을 좀 봤으니 나 풍볼에 오 시야 말, 오 지야 말했어. 아니 덴바야 말, 미덴바야 말 되는 다 준다 딜라 때니 가르친다 다 풍볼에 랑싱 주비 오 타대야 말했어. 다 풍볼라 때니 되는 랑싱 주비 오 지야 말했어. 다 덴바 마주데 덴주비 찍당 덴주 가는 마주비 세 나신신 다 강사기 다나 타녀도 나 되니 다 되니 아니 가리 랑싱이 메데 풍볼라 마두비 추기에 랑싱 요 말이 풍볼라 뚜비 추기에 랑싱 요 말이 어디 전도 다 간다마다 다 풍볼라 때네 딱 받점래 그래서 어디 뒤긴들와 다 풍볼라 때네 딱점이 윤생기 아니 다디 랑싱 마주바 세디 때라 보고 그래서 인도전에 다디 강사기 다 메비 줍지기 집반나라 집바티니 아니 루아티 풍볼라 랑싱 신도야 마주 다 풍부 지야 말에 다대 말에서 다 가지 쓰고 말했어. 랑싱 주비 지야 말에 랑싱 주비 다대야 말했어. 와 어디 다 풍부라 마두비 쓰기 요와디 말에 다 풍부라 때네 요와래. 랑싱 주비 시에는 풍부다 제메듯이 차는 거랬어. 랑싱 주비 지기는 아니 다다 풍부니 지도 타는 거랬어. 어 딘데기 돈이 다 된다도도 다 풍부라 때네 아니 두바 인상 아니 다더니 랑싱기 요 말이었어. 와 어디 뒤죽지기 발로 두선 거여레스. 어디 고연상 뒤고디 타둥이 봤고 티나니 이번 직tin줄 쉐어레. 어디 뒤뭐 요라 강사 담에 때라 파면디 뒤 강사 당 땡이 돈이 강사 담에 참을 세저로 어디 쉐인데 어디 뒤지 봐 쉐어레. 뒤라 때네 아니 강사 담에 참을 주베기 다 예신제와 되는 거레스. 무슨 다 된다디 어디서면 모두 뒤 거를 높지 올라 뒤 산인디 카도 되는 것도 대시 개와 휴쇼스로 된다디 줍도 거로.
So later in this text, this explanation or this phrasing will be explained and covered in a lot of detail, because it's actually part of the proof of how to realize and establish the subtle selflessness of persons, and the reasoning that's used for that and where this phrase comes up is a particular process of reasoning called the seven extremes, the reasoning of the seven extremes. And so within the reasoning of the seven extremes, you have this the one part of it where saying that, the self and the aggregates are not inherently one essence. They're not inherently a different essence. So here we have to, again, add this word inherently in there when we're looking at the meaning of these phrases. So, it's like you give a reason and you say this, the self and the aggregates, the self is not truly existent because it is neither truly established as one, nor is it truly established as a plural, or truly established as many, or plural, you could say either way. So it's not truly established as one, nor is it truly established as many, or you could just phrase it, just a different translation. The self is not truly established because it is neither truly established as singular, nor is it truly established as plural. So that's another reason that's related here to this reason of the seven extremes. And so what it's saying is that, there's when you look at it, there's this no way in which the self is contingent on the aggregates, and there's no way in which there's a self which is non-contingent on the aggregates. So there's no way in which the self can exist. And when we say this, it's because the self is merely labeled in dependence upon the aggregates. So this is like a phrasing that you have to kind of, you'll hear again and again, I'm sure, but there's the self is merely labeled in dependence upon the aggregates. So there's no self that is contingent on the aggregates, nor a self that is non-contingent on the aggregates. And this again is meaning that that there's no inherently existent self that is different, self that is inherently different nor inherently the same as the aggregates. And what would be the consequence if we said that the self was inherently different from the aggregates? It would mean that it was a different thing with no connection whatsoever to the aggregates. And if we said that the self was inherently the same, then it would have to be the same in every way as the aggregates are. So those are the reasonings that will be explained in a lot more detail later in the text. And we can, when we have time, we can explain those again.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so you were talking a while ago about the different ways of proving emptiness in the consequence school and the autonomy school. And you said the consequence school, it's by using logical reasoning. And the autonomy school, it's flawless sign or reasoning. And I hate to admit it, but I really don't know how are those things different. I would love to hear a little bit more so I could really get my mind about especially what flawless sign or reasoning means. I can figure out what logical reasoning means, but I don't know how that's different, the flawless sign or reasoning.
So first, I'll just clarify that what was said, the question will still, of course, be relevant, but just to clarify what was said is that the Prasangika school asserts that emptiness can be realized by using consequential reasoning. So the phrase was not logical reasoning, consequential reasoning. That means reductio ad absurdum reasoning. That means that's the Western term, the Latin term for that kind of reasoning. Reductio ad absurdum is consequential reasoning, whereas the autonomy school accepts or asserts that one must rely upon an autonomous flawless sign. So that was right. There was no explanation given about what those mean. So certainly that's still a good question. But I'm just clarifying that that's all logical reasoning. But reasoning and logic are like the same thing, basically.
I don't know how I got that in my notes then. I must have made it up. So consequential reasoning is the same thing as logical reasoning.
No, logical reasoning just wasn't the term used, but I mean, I guess just logic and reasoning are the same thing, kind of.
Oh, okay.
There's no logical reasoning isn't one of the technical terms in this context. One of the technical terms.
I bet you said logic and reasoning, and I heard it as logical reasoning.
Oh, that's probably true. Yeah.
Okay.
Consequential logic and reasoning. Yeah, right. Okay. Probably. So the technical terms here though are consequential reasoning or consequential logic, you can say. And then so that's one style, and another style is by an autonomous sign, or an autonomous flawless sign. And here sign and reason also mean the same thing. So you can say an autonomous reason. So, but I'll still ask the question again. Damboji Orangichi Goji Logne and Norchi Lamrim and the Danda the Umatal Girwas and Tony Dubila Talgirla Talgirko, but some Chogidis and then Umarangubas and the Rangugi Ta Gogoris, so you dig Keper Gari and us.
엄마 탄주받아 엄마를 안 주비 다시지로 다시 저기 뒤로지래. 와 탄주 점나 때네. 아니 데메 돈이 또 비든 제바집에 남샤 제바 인상 탄주 받지. 다 아니 탄주 점 많이 받지. 랑이 친이 주비로와 최진기 땡도 랑이 친이 주비 주자 뽑히더니 다주도 랑은 주비 다지 거네. 아니 랑싱이 망사 데마 마주비 돈이 주고래. 스니 체림이잖아. 랑주 봐서 랑주스도 랑이 친이 주비 그리고 다주 두숨 체림비 땡네. 아니 데마 마주비더니 또 돈이도 주고는 마도지기 아니 탄주 점라 때네. 오늘 딘데베 돈이 또 베더니 따와데 때라 밥 투고 말이 있습니다. 둔다 가스나 우마랑 탄주비 디체링고 말와 다주도 좀 랑원을 주바 랑신 주바 디체링고 말와 무슨을 우마랑 주비 로벨 내지기 가스나 탄주 점라 때네. 아니 돈이 또 베더니 제바집에 남샤천도 되게 말이었어. 다주도 좀다 주주 최준 순간 랑의 친이 주바 체링비 때네. 랑신 주바 체링비 때네. 아니 줍자 뽑히더니 제바 오다 딘데베다 돈유도 따와지게와 체링도 웃습니다. 군이기 로고 준세디 랑이 친이 주바 체레만에 랑신 주바 체레만을 투와래. 우마 랑주베이나 랑신 주바 요레 랑이 친이 주바 요레스 탄주베스나 랑이 친이 주바 랑신 주바 요마래 최담지 똑베 따섬레스. 와 똑베 마다 베더니 탄이 답이 따든 서비스는 녀바지 요마래 따든세 내려와 랑주베티 따든세는 녀바지 요래 그래서 따든자니 녀비 따주 두숨기 준세라 때네 아니 데메 또비 돈이 또비 데메 따와지 때라 밥고래 그래서 어디 깨지 시인데 아니 투사대 권이 뒤강 투와레스 어디는지 되시잖아.
So I'll just kind of give again a little note that the terminology here is probably a lot of new terminology that is kind of in the traditional curriculum studied in earlier classes before Madhyamika is studied, and primarily the classes on logic itself. So there's a whole section of the traditional curriculum where logic itself is studied. So anyway, but the term, so I'll just say what Genma said. So here, this is, it's like the etymology of the names of these two schools, Prasangika, or the consequence school, versus Swatantrika, autonomy school. Where do those terms come from? It's from their understanding of how the inferential reliable cognizer, which realizes emptiness, the emptiness of true existence, is generated, right? How is that generated? How is that reliable cognizer, that pramana, how is that generated? So that reliable cognizer, according to the consequence school, can be generated merely by relying upon a consequence. So that's why they use this reasoning of consequences, a consequential reason. Whereas for the autonomy school, they can't just rely on a consequence. So one must actually posit an autonomous reason, an autonomous sign. Now, when we say an autonomous reason, what does that mean? Here, really, what it's saying is, when you have a reason, there are three parts. here reason really meaning, a whole syllogism, we can say. So the syllogism has three parts. There is a subject, a predicate, and a sign. So for the autonomy school, they accept that phenomena exist by way of their own definition, by way of their own character. So they have the understanding that you must posit a syllogism where the subject is established by way of its own definition, the predicate is established by way of its own definition, and the sign is established by way of its own definition. And so, you can't generate the reliable cognizer realizing emptiness without that kind of logical process, that process of having, a syllogism, that you have these three parts of the syllogism, each of them being established by way of their own definition. The Prasangika school, the consequent school, they don't accept that phenomena exist by way of their own definition whatsoever. They accept that all phenomena are empty of existing by way of their own definition. They're empty of existing by way of their own character or characteristic. So they don't accept that these kinds of syllogisms even exist. A syllogism where you have the subject, predicate, and sign all existing by way of their own definition and being established, in the mind of the meditator, the person, as being established by way of their own characteristic. So instead, so that's really what we were talking about by an autonomous sign, autonomous reason. And what the Prasangika instead assert is that phenomena are merely labeled. They're merely labeled by conceptuality, and that the object which is labeled, when you search for it, is not found. Whereas the Satantrika, the Svatantrika or autonomy school, they accept that when you search for an object that's labeled, you do find it. When you search for the labeled object, you find it, is the position of the autonomy. Whereas when you search for the labeled object, you don't find it, is the position of the consequent school. So this is really what this distinction comes down to, whether or not they accept that phenomena are merely imputed by conceptuality or not, whether they accept that phenomena exist by way of their own character or not. That's really the kind of the main meaning of saying that, of giving this explanation of the etymology.
Okay, that's a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, then we will stop for today.
Sanje Shindo Mene Biwa Yin Zhuge Namda Shinla Che Para Shua Yetamu Guru Ran Mendal Gane Yanda Yami Kanre Ravi Govi Shingan Zu Pendang Dewa Mali Jung Chere Sivan Tenzin Jazu Yin Shabi Sidi Badu Tenjuru Chi Gaten Kamzu Chile Ju Topju Dabi Lungzu Jenzin Lose Namla Rilam Lamdun Jibi Shila Sovan De Changju Simjo Rimbu Ji Ma Je Pana Keju Jewa Nyamba Meba Yang Koni Kundu Pewa Sho Jewa Di Jewu Gun Sonama Yishi Tsozo Sonama Yishi Le Jun We Damba Guni Toba Sho. Thank you. Good night. I wish you all a good night.
Thank you, Geshe. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good